So, here's my sense of what we have to do. Put this on full screen. All right, so we have the new financials. You've all gotten the spreadsheets and they've been put into the report that you got last night. So any discussion of that? Confirmation of other new language that is in the draft report that you all got last night. There are a couple other things that have come up since, and I'll have a list of those so we can do that.
Is this different from what you gave us last night? What's here on the table?
I don't believe so. No.
Okay.
I think that's what you got last night.
Same thing.
Yeah. Yes. And actually, there's I only made one change to the report, not in the version you have, but upon request, I've added charts for the PV and the standalone PV and the standalone take them down. That's the only thing I put into the report since I sent it to you. Any other suggested new language I put on a separate piece of paper or a separate document that you don't have in front of you, but that we'll go over together. So we'll go through the new language that you all have seen, plus the additional things that have come up in the last day or two that hadn't gotten addressed. The treatment of electricity costs for the treatment plant across scenarios came up again as a question, so I think we need to resolve that. And then there's some of the other items like safety and whatever that's in the suggested new language section, and then a question about appendices. Just to be clear, your thoughts about how many versions and what versions you want to put in there of these updating documents, trying to balance between transparency and full information and complete overload and confusion for those who might try to read them.
I was going to say, that's what the truth is.
Exactly. And then the other item on our agenda for tonight is the report out to the Board of Selectmen. You might have heard they had proposed next Monday. They asked me, I told them I'm not available that day. I'm not available at all next week. Then they asked me if I could do Friday. I said I could, not that I wanted to, but so that's for you guys to discuss this week Friday. So that was one option on the table. Another option might be to do it next week but without me, and another option would be then the following week. So that's as far as I can see what our options are. So for me, the only time I could do it before the 28th would be if we did it Friday. So we can get into talking about that, I think, maybe at the end, and we'll make sure we take time to do that because we have to figure that question out. So that is our agenda for tonight. Questions? Okay. So let's go first through the financials and the red line, any red line new language that came in here since you last had seen it all together. I don't know why it started in the middle. Okay. Is that a good size for everyone? Okay, so we'll call it this one 5, and we're gonna, today is the 14th, no, today is the 15th. Yes, indeed. Okay. So I added Maurice, who I had left off since I went from our original list. I did not put alternates that had never come to the table. We had a couple of alternates who were initially assigned and then left for certain reasons. Malcolm, actually, I think we're gonna do just the primary group here tonight, so if you can just sit back there.
All right, what about all
tonight.
the questions that
They're all on here. I've got them all. They're captioned. We will be discussing them.
everybody
Okay.
comfortable with that?
I had a request that, I mean, the ground rules say we have just our group, and a couple people approached me and said, I think it's probably better to just have the primary, and I think that is more consistent with the ground rules, so that's what we'll do tonight. Okay, thanks. So any questions about the listing of primaries and alternates here? We're good, okay. All right, I'm just looking for red lines. All right, so I put the similar concerns raised about Win 2 once it began operation, just to chronologically make it make sense. I put it here in this footnote, just wanted to check that,
Just a quick comment.
yeah.
Up above, we use the word complaint, and down at the in the footnote, you have concerns.
So you want me to stay with complaints?
Yeah.
So if you object, you need to just say so. We're gonna move quickly. Just looking for red lines. We'll go back and do the right numbers for the appendix, but I did not prioritize that for this purpose. Okay. So some conversation took place after our meeting about what was the appropriate way to refer to the findings at 27 Ridgeview Road. I sent an email to DEP. This is how they responded. They suggested this language. First of all, that Route 28 has a significant influence, not is the driver, has a significant influence on background or ambient sound at some, not all, of the sampling locations. So we changed that. And then they suggested that if we wanted to refer to the findings at 27 Ridgeview Road, to do so with a complete quote rather than to paraphrase it. So can everyone accept this? Huh?
That's a quarter right from Laura.
This, so the quote there, while other, that's a quote from the DEP report. Okay?
Can I back you up to page 10?
Yes.
The last sentence of the first paragraph on page 10, I think you have to go up a little, supplemented by the Falmouth windmill bylaw. The way that sentence reads, I was a little unclear. It doesn't read well. So I was wondering if we could
Is that
be a
from
little
the-
bit more specific about what was meant by that. The very top paragraph. It's a long sentence, first of all.
Yes.
And then it feels like that was tacked on at the end for some
Right.
reason which doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So I was thinking the reader is not really gonna understand what we're trying to say with that long, kind of run-on sentence.
I think memory serves me that that's how it was written in the report.
All right, I guess one way of asking the question is, does the Falmouth windmill bylaw play into anything else into the findings that we then talk about? Or like, I guess how does it, what do you want people to get from that clause? Is that what your question is?
And maybe we need a separate sentence.
That's, I was gonna say, can we just make that 2 sentences?
Right, but what would the sentence be? What's the,
First one would end at 1 might exceed the DEP noise guideline, period. And then this model,
We would have to end, the period would come after level.
Yeah.
right, that's where it was. in-
because the next clause is just tells you what the DEP noise guidelines
And then
are.
we added this and it doesn't read.
So we're just reverting to version 2.
So that's the previous version, but then if you want this clause, what would the sentence be that would contain it?
What, you want me
Yeah.
to read from the report?
Sure.
It says applicable noise standards for the proposed wind turbine are the Mass DEP Environmental Protection Noise Guidelines supplemented by the Falmouth Wind Turbine Bylaw.
Might be enough just to use that and replace that entire huge sentence.
Could you put it up on top where it might exceed DEP noise guidelines and the Falmouth windmill bylaw?
Is it windmill or wind
It is
turbine?
windmill.
No, they said windmill.
Just to create a sound model, would enable them to project when and where noise levels from the operation of Wind 1 and Wind 2. I'm just trying to think how you might just use that sentence as you suggested.
Well, you could put it right after noise guidelines, supplemented by the Falmouth Wind Turbine Bylaw,
And
period.
just assume people know what the DEP noise
Right.
guidelines are. Would that, but does it still, are people clear on what that means, that it's supplemented by the, I mean, does that answer your question? Karen?
Am I the only one who wasn't clear? Because it's not that I have a disagreement with it, but I just, as I was reading it, it felt like it
Well, I don't know why the word supplement is there.
Well, that's just how they wrote it.
yeah.
I mean,
As well as,
right, why wouldn't that be? It would be in exceeding both guidelines, right? The DEP and the towns?
It's not that one is gonna overcome another, it's
Right.
both in effect.
Right,
Right.
so why not just, right,
And-
just
Well,
say,
as maybe
Use the word
sounds
and.
better.
right, that was my
But
suggestion.
does it remain in question whether the Falmouth windmill bylaw applies to these turbines?
In this
That-
context, it applies.
Well,
because-
we're talking about the sound, right?
We're talking about
10
the
dBA.
HMMH noise
Right.
model and what HMMH was tasked to do,
Right.
and that's what they were tasked to do.
yes, that's, right, we're stating history, and if we spend a lot of time on each of these
Right.
kinds of things, we're never gonna get anywhere tonight, so I would say,
So what if we
Like
just
this.
take out this description of what DEP's noise guidelines are, assuming everybody by now knows what they are, and then even though it might be.
they won't know,
They won't.
just put
Right.
and.
Just
Add
But
and.
and the Falmouth windmill
And.
bylaw.
Or as well
DEP
as.
noise guidelines and the Falmouth noise, the bylaw. Whatever.
And? Is that good enough?
That's great.
Right.
Good.
That's maybe-
Okay. Back to now page 11.
For a second.
Yeah.
I'm not sure where Jeff is, so could Linda, in the meanwhile, come to the table?
Sure.
Okay.
Was he here and then he stepped out?
Seen him, but
Oh,
I had
You
not.
just put his thing?
Uh, Yes.
No, that was next week.
Yeah. Thanks. I assumed since his thing was there that he had come
No,
and
I
stepped out. Okay.
I wanted to sit next to him. So you're stuck with me.
He was saving his seat. It's okay. All right. Anybody object to this phrasing here from DEP? Do we approve that? Okay. All right. We'll come back to where it says come back here. We'll come back to that. Don't raise that now. Okay, so there was a question about, someone said update the cost projection in this section on the mechanical changes based on the new cost models. When I went back and looked, it actually was Tony's financial estimate said very clearly that his memo actually was basing it on Weston and Sampson's financials. So I just wondered if people were okay with taking the cost out, just saying 25% less production and leaving it at that. Okay. Yeah.
Oh, it's in the next,
Okay.
just a general comment. I noticed a couple of places, sometimes you say DNV Kima, and sometimes it just says DNV, so run a search for
Okay.
that.
Can you note that here?
Weren't they just DNV though? Weren't they just DNV earlier in the process?
I think.
No,
Earlier in this paragraph, it's DNV Kima.
well, that's what I said, it goes back and forth, and we should be consistent there.
Okay, easy enough.
Insertion of a footnote, and it's in an earlier section, where we reference the GIS map. It doesn't tell anybody that it's available in the appendix. And I was just hoping we could put a footnote into that effect.
Where, you have to tell me
It's
where.
page 9, and it's the penultimate paragraph of 4.1. Begins the group explored. And then after the
Okay,
second sentence, to the turbines, just a footnote, noting that the map is in the
Yeah.
appendices.
okay. Karen, yeah.
4.4 in the first paragraph, there's a word missing.
Right.
About halfway down, it says had been installed. It needs to say which had been installed.
Okay. Good? Okay, oh, we'll come back to that. All right. Page 16. How we characterize the uncertainty and in the wind speeds. So here's the proposed sentence. Due to variability in wind speeds, approximately 5 to 6 variation annually, there is 95% certainty that actual energy generation in any particular year will fall within plus and minus 21% of the average, and 68% certainty that it will fall within plus or minus 12%.
Is that from DNV Kima?
That, yep, we can quote them there.
Just as a matter of form, it should be plus or minus 5 to 6%, it's not variability, it's one standard deviation, so it should be referred to as plus or minus 5 to 6, and take the word I guess that's fine.
Leave it like that.
Yep, that's fine.
Plus, take out variation or no?
Nope,
Just like
just
that.
get rid of that
This way.
tilde.
Yeah, and that was only there because he didn't do a absolute calculation of whether it was 5 or 6, so
It's fine.
that'll do. Okay, so,
Stacy, remember that, under the cost section, are we gonna come
yeah,
back to
we're
that?
gonna come back to it.
Okay.
Whatever's not in, first we're gonna do the things
Got it.
everybody's seen. Then we'll come back to the new stuff. Okay, so we're good. We can approve this. We can accept it. I'm not going to now. Okay. Yeah,
16, last paragraph. 1, 2, 3, 4, the fifth sentence up from the bottom. It says the financial model, actually it says it's the third sentence on yours. Could you say the financial model in this report? Because we've had so many financial models that I just
Okay.
want everybody to be clear what we're talking about.
okay. Everyone okay with that? All right, and then page 17, WTOP conclusions, just saying while noting the uncertainty involved in predicting yearly energy revenues. I think I just moved that from a different place, but it was there before.
We're coming back to that as well, right?
Oh, no, I think this is that.
And that we just,
Is it renewed?
maybe I'm getting confused.
Was that here? Okay.
Yes.
We'll come back to that. Okay.
Are we just doing the red line stuff?
Yes,
or- okay.
we're just doing the red line stuff, but if you have non-controversial other things that you want to throw in like you're doing, I think that's fine.
That's okay too,
Yeah.
okay.
How come we keep saying we'll come back to this?
Well, because there's a few things that came up as separate issues, and I highlighted those separately, and I have them in different places, so I just want to do them one at a time.
Are they highlighted in those copies we have?
Right, they're not, that's why we're gonna do them later. I'm only doing the stuff that's in your report first, okay? We're gonna take care of all the red lines we did together, and then we'll take care of new stuff, yes.
Okay, 4.6.2, which is a little up,
Care of anything, we didn't do it together.
says the debt obligations include the bonds for Wind 1. It's actually 2 bonds for Wind 1, and could you include plus interest?
We finished with the final report.
Well, the bond
bond.
includes
That
interest.
includes it.
Yes, we did.
The bond assumes interest, just saying the bond means,
You could just say
Principal and
bonding
interest
for
is involved.
Wind 1 if you
like
want.
when you pay your mortgage, you pay,
Well, then
For
people ask, what is the bond, and they get told it's only a certain amount, but that doesn't include the interest. So I think it's important to say plus interest.
how about including interest?
Fine,
Is that okay?
thank you.
Okay. Community responsiveness to curtailment vis-à-vis home sales, 4.9. So my understanding was I was asked to include the fact that we had a question about asking people to whether they had adverse impacts, and then when I was reporting what people found, that to say that what we found when people answered that question, right? So, Kathy, you had some suggestions for different language for this.
I did. But apparently you don't have it.
I do, if I,
Well, the first question on the survey reads thus: do you or anyone in your household experience any of the following adverse impacts from the 2 town-owned wind turbines, Wind 1 and Wind 2? This is one of the few places in the report where we actually get informed about what the neighbors consider the problem. And so I think it's very important that this question, which was answered first on the survey, be included in the summary of this survey.
okay, so I have now, the language that you're suggesting is in blue up here. Remove the added sentence and replace it with the following at the beginning of the next paragraph.
Or something like it.
The survey results indicate that of the 78 people who responded, 41% indicated that at least one person from their household was negatively impacted by the noise or suffered negative health impacts from the turbines.
And that, actually, you could get rid of the first phrase and just say 70, of the 78 people who responded, 32 indicated that at least one person from their household was negatively impacted by the noise or suffered negative health impacts from the turbines, and that language comes right from the survey, from Wind 1 and Wind 2, and/or Wind 2. And that was specifically referenced in the question, even though there was some comments in here about the ambiguity of which turbines people were responding about. This question was very specific.
I don't think so.
It does say Wind 1 and Wind 2.
I don't think people read that, though. I think they just answered. I acquiesced to this whole survey thing anyway. I didn't want anything to do with it.
That's noted.
Yeah, it's noted. This is just saying what the survey results say, and, you know, if we need to say,
The whole survey's in the appendix.
right. What about the 21 from the official complaint list?
That sentence should be at
I
the-
get rid of it,
yeah,
but do you want me
okay.
to include in, when I say this?
I think that would be good to have in there.
I do too.
I thought it was
Because I
interesting
think it-
because that means
I
that's
think it helps because it also shows
11
that
who weren't on the
another
complaint
10
list.
people that haven't complained did complain.
Right, and I think we've got a good number here. Okay, we got 32 people complaining. That's the
At
number.
least one person in their household. That's a household. That's what the question asks.
Okay,
Thank you.
Bob, can you live with it? Can you live with that?
Yeah, that's fine.
I think, Bob, I think it's a reasonable number because without going into the percentage, it does give you some basic numbers. Obviously, people who are responding to the survey are more likely to be affected. You
Oh,
know.
I'm fine.
Okay.
You know, people, if they want to read the survey, everybody has a different take on what it says.
Okay,
Stacy?
yeah.
If you go up to the very first sentence, as we're leading into 4.9, we changed that last time, and so the lead-in is a little strange. It just talks about the limited purpose of the survey. It doesn't say what survey we're talking about until later on. So I wondered if we needed a little bit better lead-in.
Okay.
Start with WTOT.
right, requested
It's the second or third sentence.
CBI,
Yeah.
I'll move
You
I'll
have
fix
that down below, and so
Yeah.
maybe if you
Maybe you
just
just
move
need
it
to
up or
switch
something,
those two.
Yeah,
it would just flow a little better.
yeah, okay.
That we agreed that we needed the survey to get a greater, response.
I didn't.
You didn't agree to that.
To Bob's position, I think when we actually did an initial discussion on this, he wasn't in attendance. So, and then when we came back, he kind of expressed his opinion that he does not agree with it because he wasn't there for the previous week. And I do recall that he was absent, I believe, during that one.
So this is the language that was recommended around the limitations, just making sure everyone was okay with it. Yeah.
The second sentence, one of the limitations.
Yeah.
Change the name to Judith?
I'm turning into Judy.
Tag team over there.
Number 2, at the end of that, can we just add from non-health affected neighbors?
Was it only,
I would have to go back to work.
I mean, I can pull out the numbers.
what's he talking about?
I mean, if it's true, great, but we have to verify that that's true.
Right, I'll verify it.
If you verify it.
If I verify it, it's okay to add? Okay.
Is there
Yeah.
some way we could make it clear that that first question was very clear about wind 1 and 2? I mean, it implies that that red statement, that all of the questions were unclear about which turbine, but that one was very specific. Is there some way you could indicate that?
Well, I think the sentence was added to say, in terms of drawing overall conclusions about who wants their home purchased and who wants this and who wants that, you couldn't differentiate.
So it's only relative to who, the home purchasing issue.
Well, or any of the mitigation options.
Fine, yeah, I'm just saying, it's relevant only to mitigation options and not the first question.
You made your point about the first question, this last page.
When asking about mitigation preferences. Is that?
May be affected.
Where?
Some people are affected, some people may be affected.
Where are we?
The last sentence of that whole paragraph. So where it says some people are affected by more than one
Some
turbine?
Yeah.
May be.
Okay. Okay. Numbers, so there's our new, energy impact numbers for full operation.
I'm gonna make the assumption that you are making sure that the numbers that are in here
They
are
come from
from the most recent version.
yes, and we'll even do one more
We really should. I
search.
mean, we've gone through, so these are the
Yes.
production numbers that were all
Yes,
the 84%,
yes,
plus the 14.
yes.
Should those two numbers agree with what's in the little chart below, the little table below? Because the second
No,
one
because
doesn't.
they're 5-year.
These two numbers do. Oh, sorry, this one doesn't. Yeah, okay, which one is it?
Check.
Check. Check, okay. Just because I was doing it at midnight,
Back on 5.1.3,
yeah,
and the paragraph, it's the first paragraph, second sentence. After turbines, could you insert, you begin the sentence with, "in the opinion of CPG advisors"?
sorry, where,
At the end of the second sentence, first paragraph, second sentence.
Okay,
Where it says.
Life of turbine,
0.44
right.
yes.
tons.
Could you start that sentence with, in the opinion of CPG advisors?
Or CBG.
Well, these are the people who the quote comes from.
Footnote says cpgadvisors.net, so, I can see if the,
I would say it's the ISO, there's an ISO 9000 standard for, an ISO New England standard for kilowatt hours to carbon. And I don't know if CBG Advisors is based on that, but it's not just
yeah.
one consulting group, there's a
So
number
I'll
that's
confirm that that's what that came from.
vetted, and I would assume that would be, it's a good catch on who's.
Well, if it is CPG, can we insert that?
Or I could put, based on the ISO New England, whoever it is, I'll attribute it to somebody.
Thank you.
Okay?
Just make sure it's not, if you're attributing it to a responsible,
Right.
yeah.
Not just a website. Okay. Again, now here's our new financial impacts and our new chart.
Can I just make sure I checked a couple of them that didn't, I wasn't sure if they were right, but the charts and the numbers they should coincide. It looks like that one does, but, I've been looking at the spreadsheets, so, and then the spreadsheets have charts, and the charts aren't necessarily fixed. So I just say, as an editorial check,
Yeah.
to make sure that the chart reflects the numbers.
Yeah.
It's just an editorial.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it looks like here that these should be the same though. Oh, no, because this is annual, not cumulative. Right.
That's why it's hard to. No.
Right.
And on all of these, we are gonna have the spreadsheets, and I think it would be really helpful for people to know that they can go and look at the numbers in the spreadsheets.
Yeah.
So can we just note, spreadsheet is in appendix blah, blah, blah?
You are such an optimist.
The people will go to the appendix?
Wouldn't you? 5 hours this weekend looking at these spreadsheets.
And, to that, as we get to the appendix, we can talk about that, but I think there might be some value in if you look at the list of appendices, they're insane, right? There might be some value in separating out these spreadsheets, like put them first and make them separate from all the other stuff, because otherwise you're gonna, they'll just be lost, right?
But they are so fundamental to
Yeah.
really
So
understanding.
like make them,
They can have their own category, like.
yeah, we can actually give them, before we do the appendices, we could actually have the 8B, these spreadsheets, and the rest of the appendix be 9, right? Can even separate them out.
Like, read it.
Own section, no appendix, okay.
7, and everything else would move down. On your
So
table
go
of
before the
contents.
statements?
Yeah, before the statements.
Yeah,
Yeah.
good idea. Okay, excellent. And again, I'll check all the numbers again. Make sure they match here. Yep.
The financial projections from the production estimates, or of the production estimates?
Based on? Well, it's the financial projection, both the financial projections and the production estimates. We could put and. Right? There's uncertainties built into both, right? Yeah.
The spreadsheets and the charts, why not embed them at the end of section 5 where they are relative to the scenarios?
Okay, people want to do that?
Instead of having them hang as their own disconnected stuff.
Either one makes sense.
I'll bet Eric would like that, because that means he wouldn't have to go and change the numbers on the 8, which somehow. It- Once you get into like sub, then it's like, ah. That's when I go, Eric, that's your job. Okay. Okay, so we're good with this? And again, it's building on the actual production levels in any given year may vary positively or negatively by up to 21% to reach 95% confidence. Just trying to be clear.
That 5.18, about down towards the middle, it says the WTOP recommends the following testing protocol. I think those are probably better described as conditions,
Testing conditions.
or just conditions, you know, posting it to the web and things like that.
Yeah, and I just wanted to give it some kind of thing so that for every other one, I could say, follow those same.
Right.
So is testing conditions or
I
just
think
conditions?
Just conditions,
Okay.
because a testing protocol would be
Right.
infinitely more involved.
You're right, okay.
Actually, could we have a further discussion about whether or not that's an appropriate protocols for all the future scenarios? I think it's appropriate for that one, but I have some question about whether or not it's appropriate for the curtailment options.
Okay. Hold that then, so we get there.
That whole protocol, the in-depthness
Conditions.
of the protocol.
They're conditions. I actually like conditions a lot better.
Okay, so for curtailment, I took out when revenues allow, when we're talking about flicker, because now revenues allow. So all the curtailment scenarios include curtailment for flicker. This 2 was just a remnant of a previous thing I hadn't changed effectively. So this analysis shows that, so I had to play with this a little because the previous language basically said what we've learned from analyzing this is it doesn't work. So I had to change that language because people may not agree that's the case with the new curtailment, which is Win 1 and Win 2 could be curtailed only during the quietest hours of night, 11 p.m. to 4:30 a.m. during the first 5 years. This would mean a curtailment of both turbines during the times when exceedances of DEP guidelines were reported for Win 1 and which the noise model suggests might be needed to avoid possible exceedance of DEP guidelines for Win 2. Both turbines would be further curtailed during early morning hours during parts of the year to avoid flicker. If the rebuilding of a reserve fund were not required, the turbines could be curtailed between 10:30 p.m. and 7 a.m., plus early mornings to prevent flicker in those first 5 years. Between fiscal year 18 to 23, no matter whether reserves are rebuilt during the first 5 years, the energy production and financial projections suggest that the hours of curtailment could be 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. plus early mornings to prevent flicker while still maintaining revenues that are equal to costs.
Can we also put something in there about the fluctuation of the production?
Yes, we have that in the uncertainties section. Yeah. Yes.
I just have two small ideas about inserting something.
Okay.
To reference back to the previous paragraph, which talks about 2 scenarios.
Yep.
So I'm wondering if you could say, this analysis shows that in scenario 1, if the turbines were yada, 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 and then in the middle, before it, if the rebuilding, you would say in scenario 2, if the rebuilding.
You want the word scenario?
Well, that's the word she used, so I was just trying to reference back so that people would understand.
The antecedent.
They would be looking for a scenario, and we never reference it again, so,
Okay,
That's
does
all.
that help? Everybody okay with that?
Scenario 2 is rebuilding, is it taking care of the cost of?
Both of them include the electricity costs.
I'd suggest that it should say that in the second scenario also, because it specifically says it for the rebuilding, and then says and the electricity.
Both include, payment of. Yeah.
Stacy, I have a problem that in the 5.2.1.2 measures to respond to health, noise, and property value concerns, that it's not adequately representing the, how that is meeting the neighbors' concerns.
Right, again, remember, this is just the what are they, and the next section is the 5.2.1.5 is the impacts. How well does it meet the neighbors' concerns? Right, so first we have the what are you gonna do with the turbines, and what are you gonna do with, any additional kinds of things you might do. And then we have the section that is, okay, what's the impact on the finances, and what's the impact on the noise, health, and property value concerns?
Okay.
Okay?
But
So
it's not in the
that
other
sentence
figure.
where you just put the TWO in front of.
Wait a minute, where are we?
We were back, we were here on,
It's not in the first one.
we were here on,
We agreed that was okay.
we were here, okay, so what did you wanna say though, Judy?
So the TWO in red, you need to delete the article A in front of it.
Thank
Big contribution.
you. Okay. All right.
Can I just ask a question, in this figure here on page 27, that's, there's a star saying contributions to a decommissioning reserve apply in both cases.
Yes. So there was a question, I think,
It's in some figures and it's not
Not
in
in
others.
others.
okay,
It either needs to be in all of them, in which case, I'm not sure what the star refers to, since that's like a,
Dangling asterisk?
how are people about making sure I put that somewhere in the text, but I take it out of the
I don't think it.
graph?
Yeah, put it in the text, I don't think
I
it
mean, it's not a
helps.
lot of money, but it just is bizarre to be there in some and not in others.
True, and again, I'm gonna repeat, this is a break-even component, but it dips below zero,
Right.
so I don't think it should, and in fact, in
And I think
Jason's, it
wha-
doesn't.
Huh?
And one of Jason's reviews, it actually doesn't, so,
Yeah, I had that question, why does it dip at 2019?
yeah.
I don't get it.
There's one point at which the, I think when the recs stop getting, the revenue for the recs stop coming.
That's what the slant is at the very beginning.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there should not be, if this is break even, and what we've asked for is a break even, then it should never go below zero, right? I mean, that's.
Well, unless it's above zero at other times.
I think.
So if you look at the numbers,
Yeah, when
Okay,
they
that's
said
bad.
break even,
It's
my
over a
interpretation
5-year
was over the
period.
18 years.
well, over a five, he did it in 5-year chunks, right? So I asked him to do we asked him to do the first 5 years, what would the scenario be? And again, in any given year, think about how the wind's gonna fluctuate, right? It's gonna go below zero sometimes, it's gonna go be above sometimes. But the point here is that over 5 years, it's estimated to be break even.
This is why I brought the spreadsheet with me. I'm looking at what I believe to be the most recent spreadsheet, and if you look at the break-even reserve fund, no replenishment, it's all in the black. It's, first year it's 165, 51, 56, 52. There's a $12,000, loss in fiscal year 2019. It's $12,000, and these so the break-even reserve fund not replenished still has positive cash flow of about $454,000 in the first 5 years.
This is the with reserve or without?
Without,
Right, so
without.
this,
yeah, so there should not be a dip in the first 5 years below zero, even with that 2019 year at $12,000.
Right.
Because there's money, right? So that's one thing. And then the rest of it is it's all positive. There's no losses any other year. So this
Well, there are
dip-
2019, this actually shows 2019 and 2020
different numbers.
with dips, with negatives.
Maybe we're looking
This is the one, 114. This is the one I sent out today.
at, okay. I mean, this is why I was looking, it's Sunday.
Okay.
Okay, so,
Don't ask me. So I think one, and the thing that changed, that there was a change in the way the electricity was, cost was calculated, so maybe that.
which was probably better, it was probably more consistent. So it's still, you've still got, if you sum up the first 5 years, you've still got positive.
Yeah, if you sum up the first 5 years, you've got $135,000,
Uh-huh,
and these are only 50.
right. So you shouldn't, you
And then for the break even with reserve fund, you still end up being positive because your first year is so very positive, and your next years are only slightly negative.
Mhm. So let me see what the charts are supposed to. That's the no curtailment, can you go down so you can look at how
So
the
it's
chart-
this,
No, I
oh,
I see that, I'm looking at
signature.
the way the chart goes.
And this is annual, not cumulative.
Right, so it shows each year what happens.
Right.
Fine.
Okay?
I think people should look at the spreadsheets. Because I mean, it shows.
Yes.
Notes, so-
Okay. Again, more numbers, and I will check them again. And, you know, to do the projected energy production, there's 3 different scenarios there, so we just picked the one, the second 5 years one of 11 to 7 and did the energy for that one. I think that's the one they gave me, so. Yes.
In the second sentence, up the top, over the 18-year life of the program.
I seem to be challenged with little words of such. For financial impacts, 5.2.1.4, I took out the, however, as shown above, the approach is unlikely to be feasible, because now that seems to have changed. Okay, 5.2.1.5, yes.
Sentence in red, you have turbines because,
Yeah.
or turning because.
Turning because, the turning doesn't need to be
Value
there.
of this option.
I think that word doesn't.
Turning
belong.
doesn't belong there. Right, okay. Thank you. Okay, and again, added
Top
just.
line there, financial projections and the production estimates. I think that's how we left it at the last one.
Okay,
Second bullet. Whether, I think the whether operation of Wind 2 at night or operation of Wind 1 and 2 together, I think because we changed the projections, we were now just doing Wind 1 and 2. We're both gonna be curtailed together, we weren't doing the Wind 1 by itself anymore.
so just weather operation
Right.
of Wind 1 and 2
Right,
together.
right.
Mm.
Thank you.
Whether operations, one and two together, outside the operation.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Okay,
Now on that, the 1.8, Karen, you had a question whether that
Right.
belonged.
yeah.
Because this is a break-even scenario, I have some concerns about whether doing further testing by the protocol that was mentioned earlier would be fundable under this break-even scenario. And so I'm suggesting that we remove that the protocol, as described in 5.1.8, is removed, but we keep in that we're getting input from stakeholders as to what protocols will be used.
Right, I even had a different comment since both of them are curtailed during the hours when it was expected that there was both of them, I mean, before it was only one, now that both of them are curtailed, we don't need that action to move this option.
I disagree with that.
Okay,
I think if you're gonna run them
at night.
outside of the hours where we know absolute facts, then you need to have an absolute fact that it's in compliance.
Okay, I can accept that, but don't we know for an absolute fact that between the hours of the quiet hours, 10:30 or 11 to 4,
No,
We don't,
because,
nobody measured it at 10 o'clock at night.
and the two of them running concurrently at night has never been measured.
But they wouldn't in this option that she's saying. They wouldn't be running.
They wouldn't from I think the idea is outside the hours that were tested. So what were the hours that DEP
They
tested?
tested 11:30 to 4, but
Okay.
wind one only.
Only.
So the combination of the two turbines has never been checked.
Okay,
But
and if
this
they're
will
not
curtail
running.
them
if
from
they're-
11 to 4:30.
Right, if they're
But you
not.
don't know whether between the hours of 9 PM and 11, whether the two of them running concurrently would be
Right, so.
a problem.
But that's in the uncertainties, we say that
Yeah.
in the uncertainties.
Well, that's what
What
we're
we're
talking
saying
about.
is that it would require testing in
Whether
order
it is-
to know.
Yes.
Before you could assume that it's okay to run.
Do you think it's important to say that specifically which hours you would want to?
I think it's a good idea. I mean, wouldn't we want to say which hours?
I certainly hope so.
But I do too. I think 11, we want to say 9 to 11.
Why 9? I mean,
You just said so.
8 though? I mean,
yeah, I mean,
it's the hours, you don't need to test them when
outside
they're
of what's
not
been
running.
tested.
That's the only point you're making, right?
Why not hourly?
I think okay, so we're talking really 4
24 hours a
to
day.
11.
Correct.
Right.
Okay, well, I'm just trying to get it straight, I'm not, you know. So 4 to 11, because they haven't been tested together.
There's no data.
And then 4:30 in the morning until 9.
But
Now, but that's what hasn't been tested, does that? So what Laurel said, I'm just trying to remember, from Laurel's presentation, it seemed to me that what she said is the exceedances are likely to be during the quietest hours of the night. That's what she said. Whether she's right or not is a different story, but that is what she said. And the car traffic starts up, what time? She said like 4.
Right, but you're
So the-
whatever situation arises and you're gonna run the turbines, you're going to have a piece of data that says it's legal to do so.
Is that true? Right now, they've said if you
You've got
don't do it
a block
between.
of time from 11:30 to 4 where we know there's an exceedance with one turbine on.
Yep,
We have a block of time in the day when they tested it and they did not find an exceedance. And then you've got those 2 blocks of time in between where there's no data.
You know, I think Johnny's
But you
got
don't
two.
need a legal document.
and there's none for 2, and there's none.
And there's none for, there's none for wind
So
1
does
and
this have to
wind 2.
happen for this option to
recommending-
go forward?
But you can't say that there wouldn't be exceedances because there's no information to support that.
So the question is right now, does, I guess there's 2 ways of wording it. One is, does this have to happen, right? Or the way it's worded here is the WTOP recommends. So whether or not it has to, is something you think should happen. Right. And so you could say, the WTOP recommends that if this option is selected, additional acoustical measurement be conducted between 4 PM and 11 PM and 4:30 AM to 9 AM, using a firm, with both turbines concurrently.
With both turbines running, because that's the whole point, right?
Yes.
That we need to have both of them running. Okay.
Inoperation.
To be honest with you, I don't think I would, if we're gonna have somebody go out and test for the 2 turbines running at night, I don't know why you would exclude any of, just do the whole test. Why would you send somebody out there from 4 to 11 and then send them home and then have them come back at 6 in the morning.
What if they don't find exceedances, can you run the time? Sure, I see what you're saying, that if you're gonna do it for one,
So you
Then
could just
go
take
down.
out the times and leave it.
well, I would
But what are
say
you
that
testing between 11 and 4:30?
To see if what the value is of the combined.
They're not running.
They're not running.
This is
the
curtailed.
curtailment.
No one has ever tested them. It was just because we don't really know what the levels are with both of them running during those times. It may not be just, it's likely not to be a single location.
But, so I have a question for you. If the town were to decide to not run them during those hours, would you still want them to do testing, turn them on and test them during those hours when their policy is not to run them during those hours?
Leave the hours there.
No, I agree.
But I understand what you're
Yeah.
saying, that
Yeah, I mean, that's why
why
I'm
wouldn't you do a
asking.
full test? But I think the point is, we're trying to narrow what you really need to do, as opposed to, if you were gonna do it, you might as well do this other stuff. But the critical path item is, are there exceedances outside the hours they're not running, right? That's the threshold question. Are there exceedances in the hours that they're running?
That you
And-
want to run.
And
that you
if
wanna
there
run.
is, then the option
this
would have to be
option
adjusted appropriately.
Has them running.
So it provides the information necessary to ensure proper operation.
If they decide to test at all.
But
If
you're
they
recommending,
Correct.
if they do this option. So, and then taking out the conditions, all the other details for the other one. Okay.
Why would you take
Well,
out
yeah. Why
the
would you take
testing
any of the
protocol that's
conditions
been
out?
recommended?
Well, should we go back and look?
Well, it's not a protocol anymore, it's
Condition.
a condition.
So,
How does?
It talks about things that
posting it on the
Amplitude-
website at
amplitude
Police
modulated sound, low frequency
continuous
sound,
measurements
infrasound,
at
all that
selected
kind of stuff.
locations during a full range of weather and operating conditions for extended periods such as 6 months to a year. Include documentation of amplitude modulated sound, low frequency sound, and infrasound.
Right, but this is just for exceedances for Mass DEP. Like, this recommendation is much narrower than the full, acoustical measurements for the run 'em full tilt, right? This is just, or not.
Well, why,
I mean, that's going back to the two reports from Ascentec and from DNV Kema, and that's what, at that time, that's what they suggested should be done.
And
That's where that language
I
came
would say, if you were to try and think of a reason, I mean, in this case, in the run them all the time, it's also because you're considering buying homes and setting conditions, and these things might inform not just DEP guide, you know, whether you're breaking DEP guidelines, but they might help inform if you're trying to set standards that are gonna be somehow defensible for which homes get purchased and which don't. You might find different guidelines, or different, you might use, you know, some of this information in that way. You might also wanna learn it here, but I'm not sure why. Like, maybe you wanna think about what you would do with that information in this.
Contribute to the study that Mass
Contribute to
CEC
We'd like
is
to
now conducting.
understand what is going on, which in fact we don't know.
Right,
Right.
and it does say to accept CEC's offer here still. But I mean, what do people think? Yes or no, applying these other conditions? You don't want to?
I think that we understand that the stakeholders want that, and we have included in there that choosing a methodology that is acceptable to the stakeholders, and so that would be part of the discussion down the road that the stakeholders could have. But I think there isn't enough agreement at the table that we need to include it in the report as a requirement.
Right? Can
I think we do, because if you're going to get any kind of cooperation from the neighbors at all, you're going to have to give us some information about and justify turning it on during hours that have never been tested. I think this is a really important thing for the town to do, and it should be recommended.
Well, so this is here. Testing at those hours is here. I think the question is whether they're also including the amplitude modulation and infrasound and low.
just
I
don't
think you
understand
have to
why
do
you
that.
would do it
Include
in
it.
some conditions and not in others.
Right.
If you want to understand what actually is going on, you need to make the full suite of measurements. You don't make fewer measurements. You just don't do it in the hours that you know the turbines are not running.
Right, well, I think,
That's the issue I thought we were discussing. I think the whole point is to try to understand ultimately what's going on.
okay, well,
We
let me
can
try to
disagree with whether something is understood today, but we can't really disagree with things that haven't been measured, right?
Are you saying that because this is a run the turbines option, so I guess I'm trying to understand what you're saying. Are you saying that any run the turbine option, before we would recommend it as a group, we're saying it has to have this level of sound study be done with the infrasound and the amplitude modulation, period? So whether we run it full on, whether you run the turbines all the time, or whether you do some level of curtailment, any of those run the turbine options are a prerequisite to that.
It doesn't say that, just to be clear.
Well,
So
so
if that
we're
is what you want to
recommending
say,
it.
but you don't say you can't do this until you're, I mean, because that thing's,
Well, we're saying we recommend, are we recommending
it could happen at
that?
the same time, is all I'm saying. It
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily have to
Oh,
be
right,
a
okay.
precondition.
Fair enough.
not recommend?
I'm just trying to, that's not the question. The question is I'm trying to understand what you're saying.
If they go out and measure for amplitude modulation, and they find out that the peaks, and they measure the peaks are 20 decibels above ambient, would that be cause for concern in running the turbines during that period of time? It may meet the technical 20-year-old DEP guideline, but it certainly shows where the problem is from the neighbor's point of view. Would you take that into consideration before you turned it on at 10 o'clock at night? It's a piece of data of very useful information.
So we want to recommend as a group for any of the run the turbine options that this more detailed sound analysis
No.
be done.
Absolutely.
And I don't think there's a huge, there's not a big difference. The meter I was using when I took measurements did all of that.
Yeah.
And you can do it at the
Okay.
same time.
So the science of it isn't that complicated.
What if we were to say something that's slightly less than we recommend in a way that, because the sense I'm getting is the implication that, the concern is the implication that you can't run them until you do this. And we've heard that Mass DEC has offered to pay for it, but what if somehow they miss that window and then, they have to have the money and, can they get, right? So what if we did something that was a step back that says the group also agrees that following all of the conditions recommended earlier would be a good idea, right? Or would be welcomed, or would have value, or something like that, so that we're not saying it's required to run these, to do this scenario, but we're saying, if you have the opportunity to do this testing, you should do it because it'll give us information that is interesting and could
It's
really
more
be
than
informative.
interesting.
Why
And
do
could
we
really
need
be
to water it down?
informative, right?
Why
Can I
do we
say
need to
something?
water it down?
Because there's someone who's concerned with it the way it was.
We're recommending options. It's more than a discussion. If the selectmen are gonna if they're gonna make a commitment to an option, then they have to have the information. And so it is a recommendation that further testing be done, period.
That's there already. The question is what further testing, that's what we're trying to figure out.
Include all of that.
But there are people who are saying they don't think it's appropriate.
But nobody's given a reason other than it might be too expensive.
And isn't this
Which
section
is
about,
the reason.
That's the
The name
only
of this-
argument
But
we heard, about there wasn't enough money to, under some scenario, to run it. if you want to understand it, you've got to make the measurements. And if you don't want to understand it, you should say so.
This section is called moving it forward.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'd say you put in, I think the term full suite was used before. Anything less than the full suite of testing doesn't move this forward.
But not everybody agrees with that, Judy. We've just heard that not everybody agrees with that, so there's a problem with putting that in.
So there are people that don't believe in moving it forward?
No, there's people who don't believe that that's required in order to move
To
it
move it
forward.
forward.
Well, what's so difficult about doing the testing and finding out?
You know, it is required in this, how are you going to know what level of harm to impose on the neighbors if you have no information about it? We don't know that, that on Saturday morning when the traffic is really low, or Sunday like it was at my house last Sunday, there was hardly any sound out there. There's no data on Sundays or Saturdays when there's no people rushing off to work. It's very quiet. And you're talking about imposing a level of harm on people that you know nothing about. So in that sense, I would think it would behoove the town, it would behoove everyone who wishes to put this forward to be a little more informed.
So where do we stand?
Name the stakeholders who don't believe in the testing.
Well, can I say something? I'm curious about the testing that's being recommended. Do we have guidelines that these testing is going to comply with or not comply with?
There's,
That would,
yeah, I mean, it, you know, back in the previous section, it talks about the international, IEC, which is an international standard. That's what they use for all the wind turbine measurements. We go, you know, when the industry tests the wind turbines, there is a full annex associated with that talks about these tests.
These
and they
tests
have,
were recommended.
but what I'm asking is with this information, is the town going to be able to make a decision whether they're exceeding a standard or not exceeding a standard? Because I haven't seen that standard. And that's what, so I'm wondering if we take these tests, other than gathering information, what is it gonna do?
It does both of those things because, as Todd pointed out before, the same level of effort is involved in collecting all of the data that we're interested in looking at that would inform the town relative to DEP, relative to a windmill bylaw, and it would also inform them relative to what the science that's emerging is informing everyone about. And it would take no extra effort to collect that data.
So let me just check in for 1 second. Is this conversation likely to lead to a conclusion where we would agree on whether or not to have this
Recommend this.
in here? Karen, I mean, I'm asking you because I know
thought
you've
Well,
said that you're not really comfortable having the full